In this set of examples, we're going to be taking a look at subtracting numbers, both positives and negatives. And in these examples, we're going to be taking a look at it using chips. Now, I like using chips as a way to visualize adding and subtracting and operations with negatives, because if you actually have something in your house that you can actually move around, you can actually create your own chips. I even grab like something from a board game or something around the house and move those around. For my purposes here, where I'm actually writing it on paper, I'm going to be using black chips to represent each positive and red chips to represent each negative. All right, so if I'm going to do a problem like our first one up here, 5 minus 3, which yes, you probably don't need a manipulative to figure out, but it's a great way to be able to see how this works. It's telling me to start with 5 positives. So I start by just laying out 5 positives on my board. And again, you can do this with an actual physical chip in order to be able to move stuff around with your hands. And what we need to do is we need to subtract 3 positives. And so it's telling me to take 3 of the positives that are currently on the board and take them off the board. Now I could just erase them, but I want you to be able to see my work as I'm doing it. So I'm going to cross them out. So I'm going to cross out 3 of my positives. All right, and then what am I left with? Notice I'm left with only 2 of the positives, which means that my answer then is a positive 2, which you probably already knew, but now you can see using the chips how we got there. For our next one, we're now going to be doing 5 minus a negative 3. So once again, I'm going to start with 5 positives laid out on my board. But then I have to subtract out of that picture 3 negatives. And of course, this is where things can get tricky with this one, because you'll notice that there are not any negatives currently on the board. So what we're going to do is we are going to add chips to the board until I do have 3 negatives. Now, the way that we can add chips to the board is that we can add them on in pairs. Because if I add a black and a red together, what does a single black-red pair add up to equal? Well, it's a positive 1 and a negative 1. They cancel each other out. They add to 0. And so for that reason, we can go ahead and add a positive-negative pair to the board and still have it equal the same thing. Because I still see on my board here just a positive 5, because these would cancel out. So knowing that, I'm going to go ahead and just add my chips in pairs here. So there's 1 red, and then I have to add another red. I need a grand total of 3 reds on the board. So there. Now I added them in pairs. Notice it has to be added on in pairs like that. But now I actually have the 3 negatives on the board that can be canceled out. So now if I cancel out and subtract those 3 negatives, I can see what I'm left with. And you notice that all that's left there on the board is a grand total of 8 positives. And so that's why 5 minus a negative 3 equals a positive 8. All right, so now we can go ahead and go on to our next one, where we're going to do negative 5 minus 3. So we're going to start by putting down our first number, which is a negative 5. So that means 5 negative chips on the board. Then I need to subtract 3 from that. Now notice that means I'm subtracting a positive 3. I don't have 3 positives on my board. That means I got to add some on again. So I'm going to be adding pairs again. So remember, 1 black, 1 red together at a time until I have a grand total of 3 positives actually sitting on that board so that I can take them out. So now that I have 3 positives on the board, I can go ahead and subtract out those 3 positives. And having done that, notice that I now have a grand total of 8 negatives sitting there on the board, which then means that negative 5 minus 3 is negative 8. And then finally, we head on to our last one, where we have negative 5 minus a negative 3. So again, I start with my first number, which is the negative 5. And in this case, I am subtracting off that board 3 negatives. Well, I have negatives on the board. I can go ahead and start canceling those out. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out here 1, 2, 3 of those negatives so that they've been subtracted. So I subtracted 3 negatives off the board, then I just look to see what is left, and I have 2 negatives left on the board. Therefore, the whole thing equals -2.